The plan was to arrive in Uruguay and travel South America, but we arrived 9 days before the first COVID case was diagnosed in the country, so that kind of shut down every plan we had made, but we're still here 6 years later, almost, so can't be too bad. There are certain parts of our culture here that are very different than the way I grew up. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other, it's just learning how to become familiar with a complete different way of life is not always easy. Some things just simply don't translate to English, and then you really need to understand the language to understand the culture.
The Spanish that they speak in Uruguay is also distinct.
It depends on what you're used to. And when I was learning Spanish in Australia, it was not anything specific, but it was generic South American Spanish. So coming here, it was definitely a slap in the face of, I really thought I had a basic understanding of Spanish. Then it was having to undo a lot of the learning I had previously done, and then kind of felt like starting all over.
Argentinians and Uruguayans sometimes see themselves more as European than Latinos. How deep does that go?
Me, as a very white Australian saying this, I am always careful with maybe how much I talk on the subject, but
anyway, so let's take it back to your origin story. We could start there. Where are you from originally? Where did you grow up?
So I'm from Adelaide in South Australia. It's always hard when I explain that to people because I just say South Australia unless someone's from Australia or New Zealand because nobody knows my city. But it's the capital of the state, but it's a lot smaller than Sydney or Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth even. The other capitals are a little bit bigger, so.
Yeah, no, yeah. I know what you mean. With Canadians, it's the same way. If we say the city that we're from, unless it's Vancouver or Toronto, people aren't going to know it, right? So
maybe they're I've heard of the name, but I couldn't point to it on a map.
Yeah, so then you start talking in just kind of geographical areas, right? Oh, I'm from the West, or I'm from the East, or in relation to cities that other people know. I'm this far away from Toronto, I'm this far away from Montreal or whatever. So I think Australians probably have the same problem. I'm kind of familiar with Adelaide. I haven't been there, but I've been to Australia, and I went to...
Because you did a working holiday visa there, right?
Yeah.
So were you there a whole year, or...?
I was there for 6 months. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was going to be a year.
And which part did you visit?
Well, I started in Brisbane, and I went up the East Coast. I did that kind of typical touristy East Coast trip, and then went all the way up to Darwin and then down the West Coast to Perth. So I kind of went almost everywhere except Adelaide.
Yeah. Yeah, common.
I also didn't go to Melbourne, and we flew to Sydney. I flew out of Sydney, and so I spent a few days there, but I wouldn't necessarily count that. So I kind of have been everywhere except Southern Australia, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's valid. I feel like you've been to... I haven't even been to any of the Western Australia, or Darwin. So you've been to places I've not even been yet, so that's pretty impressive. Most people just hit Sydney, maybe Brisbane, Gold Coast, and then they fly out again.
I mean, to be fair though, Australia is a really big country, and I've probably seen more of Australia than I've seen of Canada even. So we take our own countries for granted. I think that's a common experience for people, right? It's more interesting to go abroad. And so growing up, did you go on international trips?
Never.
Just Australia?
I didn't leave Australia until I was 21. My family was never poor, but I have 2 sisters, my parents. So to travel with all 5 of us, and Australia is in the middle of nowhere to get anywhere, unless you're going to maybe New Zealand. It's multiple hours, thousands of dollars. So we traveled within Australia a bit, but no, my first trip internationally was on my own as an adult after graduating with my bachelor's. So yeah, definitely not as a kid.
Yeah, it's definitely harder for you guys to go on international trips. We look at European countries and it's wow, isn't that crazy that they can just drive to France for the afternoon and then go home, and all the countries are so close together. And then I think from the Canadian perspective, oh, that would be so nice. but I'm also taking for granted the fact that, we have the US right below us. Lots of people do road trips to, down the west coast of the US, for example, or they'll go to like Arizona is a really popular spot for, older people to go in the winter when it gets cold. But you guys don't even have that.
Escape the winter.
You get like no road trips are going to be international for you guys.
No. Yeah, you can do road trips, but you could drive for 10 hours and you're still just heading north. So lots to see, but I don't know. I kind of like to describe it, especially here in South America. I'm like, if you think of Brazil, it's very similar in that the north and the south are going to be very different because the country is just physically so large. So you can experience different like subcultures within the same country, but to go internationally, you have to have a reasonable amount of money and a lot of time. It's like if you're going to go and visit Australia, you can't just you could, but I wouldn't recommend to go to Australia for less than a week because you're traveling such a long distance. It takes you so long physically to get there and so much money that to then turn around and go home again feels kind of silly. So you kind of need to make sure the trip is worth it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you have to have a car. I mean, same with Canada, right? Like, you're not taking a train across the country necessarily. You gotta...
No, you can.
Okay.
It exists, but that's actually more expensive than flying. It's like a luxury thing for elderly people usually, or tourists. My sister used to work on the interstate trains, but yeah, it's not like a cheap form of travel like in Europe. It's actually considered more bougie.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, we have like I think it's a Trans-Canada train or something like that, but the same thing you're saying. It's like, it's expensive. Like you might as well just drive or fly or, do something like that. So you said your first trip internationally was when you were 21. Where did you go?
I went to Costa Rica, actually. Random location. I wanted to travel. I didn't really have anyone to go with at the time. And I'd seen someone on YouTube posting about this like language school that they were going with, EF. And I was like, education first, like, why not? So I was looking up what places I could go to. And Costa Rica popped up because I wanted to learn Spanish. So that's kind of how I got into that whole realm of things, was through this solo trip. I was only there for 3 weeks, but I did like an intensive Spanish course. I was mostly doing the course as a way of traveling solo as a female to a country I didn't speak the language of, but I felt like I wouldn't be alone. I knew I was going to be staying in a school with other people my age. There were people there that I felt like I could trust. So I was like, okay. I felt like solo traveling, but with trainer wheels. So
Sure.
I wasn't completely jumping into the deep end. But yeah, took me lots of hours to get there. They thoroughly security checked me because I think it was a very strange route to be going on as a, person all by myself. But I got there and I loved it. And I would go back tomorrow if I had the opportunity.
I mean, how long is that flight from Australia to Costa Rica?
I don't even know if there is a direct option.
How long did the whole trip take?
From Adelaide to Sydney. Ooh, couldn't tell you. I'm just turned 30, so this was almost 9 years ago now. But I had to go to Sydney, that's already 2 hours. Then from Sydney to LA, and then LA to, I think I went straight to Costa Rica from there. So at least 20 something hours, but I'd be lying if I told you it's been a long time since then.
And so you get to Costa Rica, you want to learn Spanish. I mean, you said that the school was kind of, traveling with training wheels on, like you could kind of have some structure that you could get into when you arrived. You didn't have to be on your own. Was Spanish something that you really wanted to learn though, even like as you were planning that trip to Costa Rica? Was that something on your mind?
I think I'd always had it in my mind that I thought it would be a fun language to learn. I'm not sure what the situation is in Canada, but most of the other foreigners I meet here now are from the US, where Spanish is a lot more common to speak than it is in Australia. So I actually learned Italian in school. My grandma was born in Italy, so it would have made sense if I picked Italian to learn, but I only learned that in primary school, and I remember like to count to 10 and the days of the week, and everything else has left. But yeah, I don't know if it was music. I loved listening to Shakira growing up. When you'd like sing along to the songs and you had no idea what the lyrics were, but you could like make the mouth sounds. So I don't know what it was about Spanish, but I just thought, that sounds like a fun language to learn. Why not? And then the two options were to go to Spain or to go to Costa Rica. And I would have been traveling in November. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to leave Australia to go to almost winter in Europe. Like Costa Rica sounded like the better option because it's tropical. So I guess I didn't always plan on learning Spanish, but it was something that for whatever reason fascinated me more than other languages. And I thought, why not?
Yeah.
Give it a go. And like I said, I was only there 3 weeks. So my learning was very minimal, like basic grammar, conjugations. I knew probably 2 phrases before I got there. I was vegan at the time. I was like, soy vegana, no como carne. And then like how to say hello and like nothing else. So it was like very, very beginner. But yeah, I made do. I learned the basics and then flew back to Australia.
And so how did you feel like your learning was in Costa Rica? Like after 3 weeks, I mean, I would imagine you learned some more than the 3 phrases you got there with.
Yeah, definitely. I could have learned a lot more in that time, but because I was going, language was kind of like a sub part of my trip. Yes, I was staying at a language school, but my main goal was just to make friends and to experience the country and do more cultural things. So I would say like I came back and I would have still been in like A1, A0 level of Spanish. Like I could understand the basic concept, but in terms of conversing even with the locals, it was very much like, how much does this cost? Where's the bathroom? Like I think it was mostly my confidence was very low. And I'm not the kind of person that would just walk up to someone and be like, okay, I learned this morning, let me go practice it.
Sure.
It took me a long time to like psych myself up mentally to use what I was learning. And I do think that slowed me down a lot. But yeah, that was like my first dipping my toes in the water of travel and of language. Because before that, my whole family, except for my grandma, only speaks English. Like not a single person speaks more than 2 words of a different language. So it was definitely like a different path to choose.
And I think like Costa Rica as well, I think a lot of people speak English there, don't they? Because it's like, it's super popular for especially American tourists. I think they even use American dollars, don't they?
Yeah, you can definitely use dollars in some of the, and where I was staying, I think because the language school was there, they were quite familiar with having tourists come. Like we weren't in the capital of Costa Rica, it was on the other side of the island, but still you could definitely get away with speaking English for most things. So yeah, it was definitely an easier place to go to, whereas I feel like if you went somewhere more rural or less familiar with tourists, it would have been probably honestly a lot better for my language learning because I wouldn't have had the option to fall back on my native language. And all the other people I was speaking with, I felt like I was cheating a little bit because there were people from all over Europe and they were learning Spanish through English, which is already their second language. And I was like, oh, like you'd go around the circle, how many languages do you speak? Like, oh, 3, 4, 6. And I'm like, oh, I speak 1.
That's the
it's
English
like really
experience.
embarrassing.
That's definitely the English experience,
yeah.
though. We don't have a great reputation of learning foreign languages as English speakers.
No.
I mean, but it's
easy to become lazy and complacent.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so easy just to speak English internationally. But you said that you wanted to kind of ease into traveling anyway, and so not learning the language, to a C1 level or whatever is totally understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, you were just getting started with it. I mean, my first real international trip that I went on solo was that trip to Australia. And so that was definitely easy mode in terms of the language. Yeah, and that was part of the reason that I chose it. It's like, it's a Commonwealth country. It's pretty easy for the visa. Everybody speaks English. So I totally get that. It makes sense. And so when was, you went back to Australia after that? And then when did you go abroad again?
So I'm trying to think what year it was, but the details are kind of blurry. I probably should have made a little chart, but I went to Costa Rica for the first time after finishing my bachelor's degree. So then I went back to Australia, spent Christmas, and then the following year I began my master's. So that was another I think it took me 3 years to complete, actually, like 2.5 years. So yeah, I was in Australia that whole time. I traveled a little bit here and there. I went to the Philippines, which I know you're also familiar with. A friend of mine in Australia, she's half Filipino, and she got married there, and it was an incredible experience. I think there's always something so special when you get to travel to a country and not just see like the capital city, but we flew in to the airport and then went on this tiny little plane that was like 20 something people to this random little island that no one had ever heard of, and we're staying in their family home, and it was a crazy, incredible experience. And then other than that, yeah, I think that was the only other time I left the country before packing up my life and leaving for good. And here I am. So
and when you say leaving for good, you're referring to going to Uruguay.
Yes.
And how did that happen?
I think the common, like this is such a theme for most people who decide to leave the country kind of semi-permanently. It was for my now husband, Alejandro. I met him in Australia, but he was there on a student visa. So his mother is from Uruguay and his father is from South Africa. So very random cultural mix, but we met in Adelaide when he was studying there. But when you are no longer a student, the student visa ends. So, you know, he was going to go somewhere and I thought, why not? I had just graduated from uni. I had nothing really holding me there that I think the timing just worked out well. I had always wanted to see more, and I always thought maybe minimum 6 months I wanted to live in a different, not even just a different city, I wanted to live in a different country, experience a different way of life. I never thought about Uruguay specifically. I didn't even really know it existed, but that's why we picked here. South Africa was beautiful to visit. We spent 3 weeks there. Not really a great country to live right now. It's a lot more dangerous. I hear people talking about South America all the time, but yeah, when you compare the two, Uruguay is like way safer than South Africa. But yeah, so we came here at the beginning of 2020. Really terrible timing, but just before everything kind of went down with the world, didn't really know what to expect. The plan was to arrive in Uruguay and travel South America. But we arrived 9 days before the first COVID case was diagnosed in the country. So that kind of shut down every plan we had made. But, you know, we're still here 6 years later, almost. So, you know, can't be too bad.
I mean, like, you're right that I think that's a common story that people have, you know, about meeting someone and then moving to a different country because of that person. And it makes total sense because, I mean, it takes quite a bit of motivation to leave your home country permanently. You have to have a really good reason for that. And I think that sometimes people romanticize the idea of going abroad, like, oh, wouldn't it be great to spend like the summer in Milan? And then they don't realize that you have to trade a lot of things to leave your home country. There's a lot of logistical things you need to sort out. You need a new place to live. You need a way to make money. You have to learn a new language a lot of time. And so it becomes more complicated. But when you have a partner from another country, it gets really simple in terms of the motivation. You're like, well, now I have, a place that I want to go. And what also is interesting about that, I mean, my wife is from Colombia, and so I can, relate to that as well, is that before I met her, I didn't know anything about Colombia at all. And then after I met her, I just became, now I'm going to get to know this country because of her. So it's almost like you end up in a place that you didn't even really choose. It just came with the person, you know what I mean? You said you didn't know a lot about Uruguay before you went there. So what was that like, kind of learning about a brand new place for the first time?
I think a lot of it was just being young and naive. I think because I felt like it was a choice I personally made. No one forced me to come here, but I always knew I don't really feel like long distance relationships. For me, I wasn't sure how that would work for me, and I knew that this was a person that I could see spending my life with. So I was like, okay, well, if he can't stay in Australia anymore, then we have to go somewhere. I mean, if I want to stay with him, then okay, that means I'm going to. And logically, I was like, okay, if he has citizenship in 2 countries, it makes sense to pick one of those. So Uruguay, like I said, I knew basic beginner Spanish. So it made sense. Why not try that? But I definitely wish I had gone back and, if I could go back and do a lot more research about the country before moving here, I probably would have still done it, but it would have been nice to know a little bit more before just getting off the plane and diving straight in. But it was a fun way to do it, I guess. And I think because the reason for coming here was family based, I didn't feel the need to do research because it wasn't like I was choosing between two countries and making a bullet list of, okay, this one's better for this and this is better for that. I was like, oh, Uruguay, that makes sense. Let's go. But yeah, it definitely meant that there were a lot of surprises. And I think especially like my situation is maybe a little unique in that my mother-in-law is from Uruguay, but she had lived the last 30 years outside of the country. So I was getting most of my information about Uruguay and Uruguayan culture through her. But she'd really only, and my husband as well, he didn't grow up in this country. He was born in South Africa. They moved around a lot, Hong Kong, Nigeria, South Africa, all over the world. But they'd only ever really been in Uruguay over the last 30 years for Christmas, for holidays. So they hadn't really, like, the understanding of daily life and daily struggles is very different than what we experienced, like, moving here and living life here. Like, we weren't just here. And I didn't come here for a short period of time to test it out. Like, we packed our stuff, moved here, and then I got quarantined in the country, couldn't even cross the border, or they wouldn't have let me back in. So it was like hard mode. You're here now. I could have left to Australia, but Alejandro, like my now husband, he wouldn't have been able to come with me. Even after we got married, you still needed a visa. So it's like I could have fled to my family whenever, but then I would have been alone again. There were extenuating circumstances. So it's a fun adventure to look back on now, but at the time it was definitely stressful.
Sounds like a lot. It's like 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah.
Like, how long were you guys dating when you moved to Uruguay?
About 2.5 years, and we'd just gotten engaged. We'd already kind of decided that we would leave the country together, and then we got engaged over New Year's, and then we left Australia in February. So it was kind of a lot fairly quickly, but yeah. So now we've been married for over 5 years, but this was
before that.
Yeah, fairly quick.
I mean, like, I would imagine that if you were really motivated to stay in Australia, you guys could have just got married there and he could have got a visa or a citizenship through that marriage, right, for Australia.
Technically, yeah, we probably could have, but it would have been, by the time we got engaged, it was like the flights were already booked to leave the country. And like, yes, we could have rushed things and done it just for the paperwork. And in hindsight, if we had stayed in the country, I know that people who were there, whose visas then expired, but were there during the pandemic, they were kind of granted additional time because of everything happening in the world. But again, we didn't know that that was all going to happen. And we thought, okay, better to leave now before we push you don't really want to mess around with visas and overstay, especially when we're planning to go back there in the future. We didn't want to have black marks on the record and all that. So, and Uruguay is quite known for being a place of, it's quite easy to get residency here. So to do the paperwork for me to live here permanently was going to be way cheaper, way faster, way simpler than, again, right now, we could move back to Australia and they can't deny the visa now, but at the same time, it's going to cost us thousands of dollars versus $100 for me to live here. It's just a different game.
Well, and it sounds like you guys were looking for an adventure anyway, right? Wanting to do something different and something new, and kind of in some ways discovering the country at the same time, right? Because your husband has, a connection to the country, obviously, but, not a ton. He was also pretty international. So you said that if you had known beforehand, you would have done a little bit more research. You could have avoided some surprises. What were some of those surprises for you when you got there?
It's mostly lots of small things. Again, growing up in Australia, we didn't really learn a lot about South America at all. And what I knew about Latin America was, or what's seen more in media, not social media, but large Hollywood, I guess you're talking, would be Mexico. You see a little bit of Colombia maybe in more recent stuff, and Brazil. And the Uruguayan culture is very different. It's a lot more quiet, a lot slower pace, a lot less colorful. It's very, very different than those other cultures I had maybe seen. And again, this is ignorance on my part for not really understanding that obviously in such a large continent, of course, there's going to be huge cultural diversity in just about everything. But even the food here, I think, is very different than what I was used to in Australia, coming from such a multicultural country. And Adelaide, even being quite a small city on the scale of Australia, we have, like, you can go to a restaurant from every country in the world almost. Here, the food is very much meat and potato, pasta. And I don't eat meat. So I hear the meat is incredible, but that's not something that I choose to eat. So because of that, the flavors and the culture around food is very different than what I grew up with, even though Uruguayans are very proud and very connected to their Italian heritage, and I'm a quarter Italian, but I feel like the food that I grew up eating is still very different than what they eat here. So for some reason there's this like difference. But yeah, other things, I mean, obviously the language, but I knew that the language was going to be an issue, or that it would be a challenge of something that I would have to adjust to. I knew about like the greetings. That's a big one when you get here, is the physical touch is not something that my family really does a whole lot. Like to hug, like I can remember probably in the last 10 years, I think I've hugged my parents like 3 times. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, it's like every time you see someone, it's like a hug and a kiss. And it's not that we don't love each other the same. It's just the way you show it is so different. And that's something I actually really like about the culture here. But it was like the thought of physically touching strangers is like, to an Australian, that's just like very different. Mate, like I'm drinking now, very popular here. But you would drink from the bombilla, like the straw, and then you would pass it to your friend or someone you didn't even know, and they would put their lips on the same straw, and you'd like share it around the circle. Like post-COVID, that culture changed a little bit, but now it's getting a little bit back to the way it was before. But again, in Australia, you might share a drink with your best friend or your romantic partner, but you wouldn't just like share it with like the whole group of 10 people. Like that germs-wise is kind of crazy, but it's just, normal here. So there's lots of little things, but
I mean, little things can be big things too, though, right? Like after a while, those kinds of things can add up. You can have a lot of little things and go like, wow, like life is really different here than it is back home. I think that closeness in general, like you were talking about the diversity of cultures in Latin America, and of course they're all very unique. But I think that closeness, that kind of touchy-feely, kind of the greetings, those seem to be universals in Latin America.
Yeah.
Whether I talk to people that are living in, Mexico or Colombia or Argentina or Uruguay, Brazil, that everyone kind of says the same thing. And I think that depending on what your personality is like and your home culture, that can be a challenge too. Because yes, it's like, okay, you do the greeting, you do the kiss on the cheek, you do the hug. That's one thing, but I think it also carries over into lots of different aspects of your life, like just being close to people all the time. I often felt like when I was in Colombia, I never really had my own space. Like everyone was, there was always people like sharing, you'd share a room, and the people would be sharing a bed, like even like, with your aunt or whatever, people would like share a bed, or like there'd be rooms that don't have doors on them. And like, and it's a beautiful thing how connected everybody is, and how like they're not shy to be with each other, like in kind of an unfiltered way. Go to a restaurant and like, oh, I ordered this thing and you ordered that thing, but I'm going to give you some of my food and I'm going to take some of your food. And there's kind of an expectation that you're going to share. And so it's beautiful. But as a Canadian, it was also a lot for me to take in, where I was like, okay, like relax for a second. I need some space. I got to like do something on my own. And so those little things can kind of build up. Like, was that overwhelming for you?
At times, yeah. I think the things that really overwhelmed me more was, I guess, especially first getting here, was just feeling like I didn't understand anything, like not even just like the words people were speaking, but like when it felt a little bit like being plopped in the middle of like a different dimension, that I just like didn't understand the rules for how this place worked. And that, like, I remember, I think we were here for maybe a week, and I was out with my husband's cousin and her husband. And they were showing us around to all these different places, being really nice, but they hardly spoke any English. And my Spanish, I thought I spoke okay Spanish when we got here, but I was so wrong. And I think I just cracked. And we were in this coffee shop, and I went to order my coffee for myself, and I just like froze up. And it was a phrase that I knew that I knew. Like, it's such a basic thing to do. But in that moment, I just like couldn't. And I just started crying. And I was like, I've just met these people like a couple hours ago, and they're being so kind, showing us around. And I just like, something so small as not being able to speak freely about like what I wanted to order off of a menu was like enough to break me in that moment. And like now every time I walk past that city in like the old city, I remember this moment. But yeah, it's sometimes it is the littlest things that have a big impact. Like, I know you were talking about sharing food. Like, in my family back in Australia, that's very normal to go to a restaurant and my mum would order like 5 or 6 dishes and we'd all have a little bit of each. But it definitely is, there are certain parts of our culture here that are very different than the way I grew up. But it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just learning how to become familiar with a complete different way of life is not always easy.
It's the same when you talk about languages, and people will often ask like, how difficult is X language to learn? And you go, well, it really depends what your first language is or what other languages you know. If you speak Spanish, Italian is really easy, right? If you speak English, then maybe Dutch is a little bit easier. Like, it depends where you're coming from. And I think the same is true with culture. Like, what's your home culture like, and then what's the culture of the place that you moved to, and the distance between those 2 points is going to tell you how difficult it is for you to adapt. Of course, not right or wrong, it's just different. And I think I assume that Latin culture would be a little bit more similar to, I guess in my case we're talking like North American culture, so like we're neighbors, and a lot of Latino people also will refer to the North and South America as just like the full, like one continent even, right? So
the Americas.
The Americas. And so, we're kind of like a part of the, cut from the same cloth. But then when I got there, I was like, every decision that Canadians would make, Colombians will do the opposite. Like, it's like, if we go left, they go right. Okay. And I'm like, wow, this is so different. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I went to, like, let's say China, and it was really different than Canada. Of course it would be. But here, our neighbors to the south, I thought we would be kind of more similar, but then I got there and I was like, oh my God, like, this is, maybe not. I feel like this couldn't be any more different. Of course, I think it could be. But in the moment, it felt like it couldn't be any more different. So how long did it take you to because you've been there a while now. How long have you been in Uruguay in total?
So we moved here, like I said, the beginning of 2020. And as of recording this, that was, I don't know, 5 3/4 years. Okay. Almost, let's just round up to 6 years.
Almost 6 years.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And I've only been back to Australia once in that time period because it's so far away. So we've been living here for 5.5 years. I do love it. It's great. But yeah, there's lots of, and I think Uruguay, especially I feel like if you were to compare it to countries like Colombia, it's like Uruguay it's part of South America, but being so far south, Uruguay and Argentina both are they're very proud of this fact. They love to call themselves European, which is kind of funny to think about, like, oh, maybe problematic to think, like, why do you want to be so considered European as compared, like why do you feel so passionate about being known as European as opposed to Latino? But the culture is I guess more similar in that it's a little bit less warm and vibrant, not in the fact that they're like not passionate or not like there are so many similarities, but at the same time I feel like Australia is maybe in some ways more similar to Brazilian culture in a way. Like, oh, these are very bubbly, we're a bit more loud, a little bit more into being individualism in terms of physical appearance even. Whereas Uruguay, it's very much like sameness, like blending in, not standing out too much, not wanting to be too, like, it's a very progressive culture politically, which I love. But in terms of like day-to-day people's actions, they tend to be quite conservative, which is a really strange juxtaposition, but it's interesting once you like learn how things work here. But it's a very specific culture, and I think it took me a while to like unwrap all the layers of that.
Because like cultures
But yeah,
aren't really in depth. Like you can't go to a place and be like, after a couple of weeks or even a couple of months, say that you understand it. Like it is a slow process,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
I was only in Colombia for 9 months, but after 9 months, I was like, I'm only starting to really understand how people interact with each other. Like it's a really slow process, and you have to see people in different contexts to know how they would react to things in a different way than maybe Canadians were or would. And then, of course, you have the language part. Like, as my language got better, I also understood more things that I didn't get at the beginning.
hmm yeah.
Like,
Some things just simply don't translate to English, and then you really need to understand the language to understand the culture.
and the cultural references too, right? Yeah, like you could understand the words but not know what people are referring to. And so when you
Yeah.
when you get deeper into it, you understand more of that. How do you feel now, 6 years into that process? How do you feel with the language? How do you feel like adapting to the culture? Where are you at with that?
Um, I mean, I feel like culturally, like personally, I will always be other in the fact that like I'm never trying to be Uruguayan. Like I just am not. I'm an Australian living here, but I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of understanding most things. In terms of the language, again, I can understand almost everything when people speak now, but I do still feel like there's improvements to be made in the way I can express my feelings, but I feel a lot like every year obviously it gets easier. Every conversation I have, you learn a little bit more, and just being open to making mistakes and to putting yourself out there. I think even this last year we started a little project with a couple of friends of mine, like a language exchange program. So every Saturday we meet up, and it's a good opportunity to speak with locals and to help other people who maybe in my experience but 5 years ago, because I felt like moving here it was really challenging to meet people, and so now we've created this space that I wish I had had when I first got here. Because I mean, granted, it was the pandemic, so we physically were unable to make friends and leave the house for a long period of time. But even when that was over, it was trying to learn where to go to meet other foreigners or to meet locals in a way that was natural without joining. Like, I'm not really a big sports person, and without joining a sporting club. Like, I joined a volleyball club for a while just as a way to meet other people and to do things. But it definitely was a slow process. Like I say we've been here almost 6 years, but really that first year we could have been anywhere in the world. My Spanish was consisted with walking to the grocery store and talking to the checkout person and then coming home again. So in terms of understanding and wrapping the culture, we didn't really get to do anything for a long time. But now in the last 4.5 years, it's been every month just trying to do more, understand more, talk to more people, spending more time with my in-laws and their family, and it gets easier.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a process, right? It's a long process, understanding a culture and especially a language, but you do see improvements. And I think you've also been in that environment for so long without leaving, right? And so there's probably a lot of improvements that you've made that you don't see because you're living it. They're incremental over time.
Yeah.
But then if you look back, you go, oh yeah. Like I remember when I went to Colombia, I think it was the second trip. I went for 4 months the first trip and 5 months the second trip. And I still thought like my Spanish sucks, like I don't communicate well with people. And then my sister came to visit us from Canada for a week. And we were like going around with her, and I just would see her like interacting with people and trying to do things in Colombia. And I was like, oh, like that's where I started. And now 9 months later, I feel like I actually kind of understand what's going on, and I can order the empanada for us, and I can ask about the flavors of juice that they have at this restaurant. And I
Which seem like small things, but it really is a huge, like, being able to do simple things like that makes an incredible difference in your everyday experiences, not having to rely on, like, again, I'm sure you had your partner there with you, but being able to do things on your own without being like, oh, hey, babe, can you answer the phone for me? Can you
yeah.
do this? Can you help me out? It's like having the autonomy to go and do all that on your own, or being able to even help somebody else out, makes you feel,
Yeah,
I
you're
don't know, it's a sense of pride and
kind of gaining your independence and becoming someone who can actually interface with the country that you're in. So yeah, helping out my sister and translating things for her, I didn't always get everything right, but it showed me how much I had learned. And without that example, because before that, for months, the only people I had to compare myself with were Colombians. So like, did I speak as good as they did? Of course not. I was always going to be like,
and maybe you never will.
I probably never will. I was always going to be the lower kind of like, I was the one that had the least like, fluent Spanish. And then when I saw an example of someone else who had just come to the country for the first time, I realized how far I had come. And so there's probably lots of things like that for you too, where, if you looked back 6 years, it's like, oh my God, like, I'm sure you've learned a ton.
Yeah, that's why I love creating content for that reason. Because while, especially my first year here, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to go out and speak to people and have conversations in person. I started making videos, recording myself speaking in Spanish. And I can go back and watch those and it's hilarious, honestly, because my accent is so terrible. And you can tell I'm sometimes like reading a script that I translated on Google. So it's like, it's not even good Spanish. But to be able to then think, okay, now if I look at something I recorded yesterday versus something I recorded in 2020, obviously there's, they're not, you can't even compare them. It's a completely different person. But if I look at me a month ago, you're right, you probably won't notice such a big difference. But so yeah, if you don't have someone like an objective person to be like, oh, hey, like, remember when this happened? It's nice to have like a physical recording of, oh, wow, that's where I started and look how far I've come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it would be really motivating to have kind of like a video diary of your progress.
No.
I mean, talking about Spanish, the Spanish that they speak in Uruguay is also like distinct, right? I think some people compare it to the Spanish in Argentina and how there's some similarities there. But in comparison to like, let's say the rest of Latin America, they say a lot of things differently. The pronunciation is different. Do you feel like now when you speak Spanish, it's like super Uruguayan Spanish?
Yes and no. Like the way I pronounce things is definitely the local way now. I personally, even in English, I'm not a huge slang user. So in that way, like I understand it when other people use it, but I don't really, it's not part of my everyday vocabulary. So I will always sound not Uruguayan for that reason. In the way I form sentences will always be a little bit different. But it's, like I said, the same in English. But I do like to think of Uruguayan Spanish as similar to Australian English. Like, yes, it's English, but if you go there and you're not familiar with Australian culture, it's still different. Like, you can probably understand almost everything people are saying, but then you'll meet some guy from the countryside and you'll really have to focus because they speak too fast and they don't really enunciate right. And I find the same here. Like, women or younger people tend to be easier, but a man from like the interior, which is like, anywhere that's not along the coast or in the big city, they speak in a way that's definitely like, oh, wow, I still have to maybe focus a little bit more because the mouth kind of doesn't really open wide when they're talking. And that makes it a lot harder. But other than that, I feel like it's, pretty easy to understand.
I mean, that's interesting that you say that it's easier to understand like women than guys, because I have the same experience in Colombia. Like it's easier for me to understand girls when they speak. It sounds like, it just feels like they, like you said, like maybe open their mouth more, like they're more expressive with their words, where guys tend to be like a little bit more monotone and just kind of like not mumble, but like just not articulate sounds a lot.
Yeah, I do think it's that articulation. And I've heard from locals here that, so if you're thinking that the Colombian men are monotone, here it's 10 times worse, because people will describe Colombian Spanish as having a little bit more tones, which is what we're more familiar with in English. Whereas in Uruguay, they speak very kind of same tonal, like there's not a lot of variation, which is, again, it's just a difference. It's not like, it depends on what you're used to.
Sure.
And when I was learning Spanish in Australia, it was not anything specific, but it was like generic South American Spanish. It wasn't Spain, but it definitely wasn't like Rio de la Plata Spanish. So coming here, switching from tú to vos, the conjugations is different. And it was definitely like a slap in the face of, oh, like I really thought I had a basic understanding of Spanish. Then it was like having to undo a lot of the learning I had previously done, and then kind of felt like starting all over. But
Well,
you know,
like there's so many different
again,
variations
you
of
got that.
Spanish, right? Like so many different countries that have it as an official language, and like there
Yeah,
are slang in every country, like in English as well. Australian slang is different than Canadian slang. I remember like people like to make things sound cute is what I noticed in Australia. Like it's not a mosquito, it's a mozzie. You know, like it's not a
yeah,
present, it's a prezi. It's not Christmas, it's Chrissy. Like they have all like those kinds
yeah.
of things, and it sounds cute.
Shortening words.
Yeah, like shortening words, and but it's a part of the local like dialect. Like you're actually changing words or using different words too, right? Like we have rednecks,
Yeah,
you have bogans, you know, like that kind of stuff, and you see that in Spanish, and it makes sense that there's
yeah,
slang. But then there's also an element of like changing grammar or changing pronunciation. And then I think that is harder. Anyone can just learn slang, but then when it comes to like pronouncing letters in a very different way or not pronouncing certain letters, then it's like it becomes harder to communicate, I think, or harder to imitate even. Like, okay, I'm used to neutral, like whatever standard Spanish is, and now I gotta like change the way that I pronounce this or use like vos, like you were saying, where it's a completely different like conjugation. And so I think that it sounds like Uruguay has like a bit of both. Like it has the slang and the different words, but then it also has this different grammar and different pronunciation. Like what are some of the differences between the Spanish there and like, let's say like neutral standard academic Spanish, whatever that is?
that's a very good question. I think like something you use every day is obviously like the second person. So switching the way you'd use voceo instead of tú, the conjugation. So like tenés, estás. It's like it sounds very similar, but the accent is on the vowel at like the end of the word.
Okay. So that's a singular version of you in an
Yeah.
informal setting, right? Or is it formal?
Yes. Informal. So, but you use it for everyone. Like formal isn't really used so much here. What
I
else?
mean, there's
So in terms of
the sh sound.
yes,
Hmm.
so the double L sound, but also the YA sound are very similar. It's like there's a delivery service. Like instead of Uber Eats, they have pedidos ya, but it's not ya. Like so, if you were to be looking at like Mexican Spanish, it's more of a ya sound, but here it's sha, almost like the sh sound in English, which is very similar to like keys. You wouldn't say llaves, you'd say chaves. So it's a very sh sound or lluvia. Yo me llamo Madeline. And even the word like Uruguayan, you'd say like Uruguayan, but you don't really pronounce the G in the middle so much. It's not like Uruguayan, it's like Uruguayan. So it's like they kind of skip letters in certain places, and there's a lot of pronunciation things that over time, you slowly build on it. And like, I guess similar to what you were saying about Australian English with trying to make things sound cuter, they kind of have a similar thing here with, and maybe this is all Spanish, I don't know, maybe it's just taken me a while to get used to, but instead of saying like hola, it's a lot of like olis. Like they
Oh,
like change it to like little I's and S's, and it's
holy.
like a cuter way of saying it. So maybe that doesn't exist in Colombia, I don't know.
I've never heard that. I've heard
But
besi from vecino,
oh,
like from neighbor. You go,
okay.
hola, besi.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Okay.
cute
Yeah.
version.
So I don't know if that's a strictly Uruguayan thing because I never got to this level of understanding in generic Spanish. Like I said, I had very like maybe B1, B2 level of like regular South American Spanish, whatever the hell that means. I had teachers from different countries when I was in Australia, but yeah, here it's a very specific way. I feel like if you know a decent amount of any Spanish and you come to Uruguay, you'll be able to communicate just fine. Like they're very good here at understanding other Spanishes, maybe more so than if you were to go to Spain, for example, because I feel like growing up here, you, again, maybe similar to growing up in Australia, you're consuming media from all the Spanish speaking countries. There are very few shows other than like maybe game shows and the news that are filmed in Uruguay. There's a couple movies and TV shows filmed in Argentina, so that'll have a very similar Spanish, but otherwise a lot of the movies are filmed in Mexico or in Spain. So they're very good at understanding different cultures and different slangs and different accents. But yeah, the way the locals speak is very specific still.
Well, like they also like they dub movies in Spanish, obviously, but a lot of times they have like a European Spanish dub and a Latin American Spanish dub, and I've heard that like 90% of those voice actors are Mexican, and so like Latin people, if they're watching dubbed movies, will be hearing Mexican Spanish, and so they become more used to it.
A lot of the time,
I
yeah.
also think Mexican Spanish, and I think generic Colombian Spanish, like let's say Bogota, like it changes depending where you're at. Of course, if you're on the coast, it's very different, and Medellin is very different. But let's say like Bogota Spanish and Mexican Spanish, I think are like some of the most neutral. And for like if you wanted to
Yeah.
learn a Spanish that was just like
Yeah, that makes sense.
like in terms of the pronunciation, like it's not there's not a lot of they're pretty like I don't know, just like standard Spanish. I think that
Okay.
one of the differences
I
is
also
like
think they have a lot more of like a sing song. Like the way they speak is a little bit more.
yeah, maybe
I
in
don't know, I
the
think it sounds fun. It sounds more musical almost, whereas here it's very flat.
maybe in like the rhythm of it, it's a little bit more musical, but like the like they don't remove letters. You know, like in if you go to the Caribbean, they don't say the S's, right? It's like uno, dos, tres. Like they cut it off. And I've heard that like in Uruguay as well, or when I listen to like Uruguay Spanish or like Argentinian Spanish, it almost sounds like a what's the word, like aspirated S. Like instead of a sa, it's almost just
Okay.
becomes like a little puff of air. Like is that a thing?
Yeah, definitely. Again, it's really hard to pinpoint because just like with any accent, if you speak to 3 different Uruguayans, they're all going to sound different. But I would say generally, yeah, you can definitely see that. I'm not so good. Maybe, I mean, it's not that sound is not something I really think about. So I couldn't tell you if I do it or not. I'll have to go back and look at some of my, I'll record myself saying something and look back at it. But yeah, it's definitely, it's something I've heard as well. So you're correct, but I don't have good examples on that one, unfortunately.
You mentioned earlier that like Argentinians and Uruguayans sometimes see themselves more as European than Latinos. Like how deep does that go? Like would someone from Uruguay say that they're Latino, or are they like adamant that they're European?
Yes and no. It depends a lot on who you speak to. And I feel like me as a very white Australian saying this, I am always careful with maybe how much I talk on the subject. But there is this aspect of Uruguayans think of themselves as being white. And obviously they, like skin tone wise, are very fair skinned compared to a lot of Latin America. But I think it is more than just that. And I think it depends a lot on what you're comparing it to. And in Australia, we see race very differently than they see it here. Like even someone who moved from Italy in Australia would be like, oh, you're Italian. Like, yes, you have white skin, but you're not looked at as you're a white person. It's like you're a Spanish person, you're an Italian
It's
person.
nationality
And I think
over
that's
race,
a flaw
kind
of
of.
Australia, honestly. Yeah. Whereas here, being Italian, being Spanish is like, oh, wow, I'm not. And I think this is where it rubs me a little bit wrong. It's like, oh, I'm not native. And the reason that Uruguayans are so white is because all of the natives were killed in a really terrible historic event. So, like in Australia, we don't have the best history with Indigenous people, but at least there's a chance to improve in the future. Whereas in Uruguay, they unfortunately don't have chance for redemption. Like a decision was made a long time ago and it's done. So because of that, most people with darker skin here in Uruguay are either from the border of Brazil or have immigrated from Brazil or from Cuba. There's lots of Venezuelans here. They tend to be slightly more tanned looking, but you do get a lot of variety from people whose parents or grandparents are Uruguayan. Of course, you have all sorts of skin tones, but it is this idea of being more European. The buildings are very European. You see a lot of videos on social media talking about Uruguay. Look how great. Like, are we in Paris? No, we're in Montevideo. And it's like, oh yeah, like the buildings are very European-esque. But I guess it kind of comes back to like, oh, okay, it's, but then you have Carnival and then it's like a complete 180. And people love to celebrate then the complete opposite spectrum. It's like, oh, that's not at all European. It's very, like, very Latin, very, very African, very Brazilian. It's like the colors, the feathers, the dancing, the music. And that's my favorite time of the year here, is when Carnival happens in February or end of January. So yeah, you get a lot of spectrum, and depending on who you talk to, you'll get a very different answer. But yeah,
Well,
it's a complicated topic. And again, as an outsider and a very white outsider, I try to not,
sure.
or just be careful about how I talk about it. But it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very sensitive. And like, if you look at the history of colonization in the Americas, there is a big difference between Latin America and North America. Like Canada was colonized just like, Colombia was, or any other Latin country. But I look exactly like the colonizers, right? Or Australia too, right? And so we are just like straight European looking people, because in North America, largely the colonizers didn't mix with indigenous people here. And so we still have indigenous people, of course, in all different tribes. And then we have white people, and you can clearly see who is and who isn't, or whatever, right? There's, the European heritage people and the people that were here first. And in Latin America, in a lot of countries, those two people mixed. And so you have
a lot more.
And so then you kind of have this in between where it's like, you get people that look like your stereotypical Latino, right? Kind of like tan skin, but they probably have a Spanish sounding last name, right, from Spain. And then it's like this mix of the people. And so I think that the way that you see colonization has to change because of that, because if you are like a mixed person from this European roots and indigenous roots, you've kind of become something else, where here we have like a divide of like, these people were the ones that came over and did all these horrible things, and then these people were the ones that were here before, and so then there's a separation between the people. And so, and I don't really know, like, I'm just making an observation on that, but like, I think that white people in Canada are like they're probably more likely to like see colonialism as a good thing, or accept colonial powers, which, because they were the ones that benefited from it, right? And so it's and I'm not saying it is a good thing, of course, but like, we have the queen on our money, right? So like how much is Canada as a country rejecting the colonial powers that, historically, where in Latin America you see a little bit more of like, we're no longer European, and a lot of people aren't indigenous either. They're this other mix. And so we can reject what the European side, and we can embrace the Latin side. Right. But it sounds like Uruguay almost takes a page out of like the Canadian book of saying, no, we want to be more like the Europeans or whatever, because we're benefiting from it, because we, have all this privilege that comes with it. Right. Yeah,
I do think it comes back to that. And again, I fully see why that happened. And it's not unique to here in that way. Like when I was in the Philippines, people like I said, we were not in the big city. So I was in a village where like young people there had never seen in person a white person before. So the fact that I have such pale skin and blue eyes, they were like, wow, like you look like a doll. So I understand, and that's very uncomfortable for me because in Australia, I guess the way in my circle, growing up in a very maybe more left-leaning community, we kind of talk about whiteness almost as like a negative thing. Like colonization is like, oh, like that's embarrassing that our ancestors did that. Whereas then when you go to other places, they talk about whiteness as like the ideal. Yeah. Like here in Uruguay, I would say the beauty standard, people love to be tanned, but still like to be like a whiter person who then gets tan in the summer. So it's this interesting mix. And I can, like, the more you learn about the history, I can see very much how it, like why people would have that thought process, but it's just very different than the way I grew up. And again, not the one is better than the other. It's just trying to understand how that happened, why maybe people think that way, and trying to understand rather than judge. And I feel like it can be really easy to, when you enter a new culture, to judge it based on your own biases from where you grew up. But you can't really apply those same rules to different cultures because it just is different. But yeah, here it's definitely a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think as like, like your average white person, we see it as a negative thing that people, put whiteness on this pedestal. And with that also comes an inherent assumption that whatever they don't want to be, whether it be indigenous or Latin or whatever, is somehow inferior to what they want to be, which is like this light-skinned person. And so obviously we're going to see that as problematic. But if you go back far enough, like, it is our fault. Like, the reason that people think that exactly. It is our fault, right? And so, and what I'm saying about Canada in terms of like kind of accepting those colonial roots is probably more systemic than it is cultural. Like, I think the average person in Canada would reject the horrible things that happened through colonialism. But when we look at how, like, we have the monarch as, you know, the kind of informal head of the country, and we have, you know, British people all over our money, and, you know, the main highway is like the Queen Elizabeth Highway where I'm from. Like, I mean, systemically, we're really leaning into this idea of, like, you know, our European past, as opposed to, you know, looking at the people that were here before, or even cultivating a new cultural identity, right? Where we're like kind of stuck in the past, at least systemically. I think personally it's probably a little bit different. But yeah, it's interesting, you know, and like how different countries do it differently as well. They have different, like, because Uruguay and Argentina is like mostly Italian roots, right? Not like Spanish.
Yeah, lots of Italian. Yeah, I would say a mix of both, but I guess maybe you hear more about the Italian side. And I think people, especially if you do have a tie to Italy, maybe it's easier to get an Italian passport than it is to get a Spanish passport. I'm not sure, but that's what I hear more of than the Spanish. Even though obviously the Spanish came here, I think that, you know, there's maybe an even mix of both. And the Italian immigration, I guess, was a little bit later. So maybe people have more recent, like, DNA ties. And so if you have your great grandma, maybe you can still get a passport. Whereas if you know, more generations back, you're a Spanish, you can't maybe get a Spanish passport because of that. So it's,
So they lean into it more. Yeah. And like living there as an Australian, but you do have Italian roots as well, right? With your grandma. Do people recognize that you're a foreigner there, or do they think you're from there?
I think the second I speak, I could literally say hola, and they'll be like, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm like, oh, like, what is it about? Like, I've said hi, and they're already like questioning where I'm from. I've seen Uruguayans who look exactly like me, or even whiter than me, with like red hair, blue eyes. So I don't know that it's necessarily like physical features so much as maybe the way I act and the way I dress is maybe a little more colorful. Look, Uruguayans love like a black on black. It's very like, think like Paris fashion is very chic, very monochromatic is quite popular here. And I'm sitting here in a yellow sweater, so it's maybe that's what makes me stand out. But yeah, I think I could, if I wanted to blend in, I could, but it's obvious that I'm not from here fairly quickly.
Yeah, I guess like you said, if you speak, that's going to be a giveaway too, like, because we have accents, I'm sure,
I'm also
Spanish.
a little taller than the average person. Like, in Australia, I'm so average, but here I'm considered tall for a woman, so that is also another factor.
Yeah, like I think that you can look at people from Latin America, and like obviously there's all kinds of different diversity within the countries, right? Like, they could be super white, they could be like, you know, black, they could be anything in between. Like you said, they could be redhead. And so I always felt like I stood out in Colombia, but I also hear people, like, when I talk about these topics, they'll comment and be like, well, actually, you look like you could be Colombian. And I'm like, that was never my experience. Like, at least where I was, no one ever thought that I was Colombian. But
did you get comments like that on the internet? Because I find if I say I look Uruguayan, people will be like, what do you mean? You look so white. But then if I say I'm different than Uruguayans, they're like, oh, what do you mean? My neighbor looks exactly like you. It's like they love to contradict whatever I say on the internet. Whereas if you speak to people in person, they tend to be a little bit more chill about it. But internet comments just next level.
That's totally what it is. People just be like being contrarian. But like in Colombia on the streets, like, people would definitely see that I wasn't from there, at least living where I lived. And like, even like, I remember we were just walking down the street one time, and there was this guy who was like, "Ay, mono," which is like blondie in Colombia. And like, I didn't even know him, right? Like, and so from across the street, he was like, "Hey, you look different," and I'm gonna like call it out.
Yeah,
you know?
Where are you from?
And it wasn't like a negative thing. It's just like it's just a curious thing. But people like immediately.
Actually, coming back to Yeah. Going all the way back to what you said about maybe things that surprised me coming here, that kind of thought to verbalize physical features is very common here. And that's like this I feel like is common across all Latin American countries, but it's a huge difference to where I grew up. But like calling someone gordo or negro, like it's so normal and common and like not controversial at all. Whereas to me, I'm like, oh wow, like can you imagine in English being like, hey fatty? Like you just would never say that. But here, like your abuela will be like, oh, hola gordito. And it's like a cute nickname, but they're basically calling you like little fatty. And I'm like, you just could never get away with saying stuff like that in English. But if you don't translate it, it's fine. But I don't know that I'm ever going to speak like that to like my future kids. I think the connotation in English just kind of like messes with your head a little bit, even though here it's cute and normal. And well, I don't know, some people disagree, but it's, yeah.
I mean, they have like the physical physical appearance ones, like, and sometimes they're like, they could be, I don't know, it depends how you take it, I guess. I was going to say they could be more neutral, but some people will be like, oye flaco or something like that, like, hey, like skinny. So depending how you take it, that might, I don't know, you might take it more positively than being called fat. I don't know. But there's the physical appearance ones, but then there's also like nicknames that people will use with each other that they don't know. And I don't know if this is like just a Colombian thing, but they'll say like, they'll be like, hola mi amor, like, hey, my love, like, like at a store, you'll go to like, or I remember ordering these empanadas from like this street vendor, and he said like, ¿Qué quieres, mi rey? Like, what do you want, my king?
Again, if you translate that to English, it sounds so cringy.
It sounds
but
weird.
Yeah, it's not so weird in Spanish. But I know we were joking the other day with like me and Alejandro that he has these cousins and we genuinely don't know what their real names are. Because everyone calls them like Pancho and like Pato and Pichu. And I'm like, okay, but what's their government name? Like I've been here for 5 years and I don't know what their name is like on paper because no one in the family ever uses it. So then we saw it written down and I was like, I had to ask like it was like a picture in the newspaper and they were like, oh, like congrats, you're in the paper. And I was like, which of these names is his actual name? Because I could not have guessed for the life of me. And I've been here for 5 years. But
they love the nickname.
Yeah,
they love
so nicknames is intense.
Yeah, definitely. And like sometimes with my wife's family, like she uses nicknames for her family members and I'll just hear it so much that I'll start using them. And then partway through, I'm like, is this like a personal thing? Like, am I like stepping on some bound? Like, am I supposed to be using the actual name and you guys can use the nicknames, or am I like allowed to?
Yeah, where's the line?
Yeah, am I allowed to participate?
I feel like when you're married, it's okay. But maybe if you were just a boyfriend, it's, more, I don't know.
Yeah.
Everyone's different.
Well, I pretty much did it anyway, I guess. So I hope it was okay.
I assume it's fine unless you get corrected.
Yeah, exactly. No one said it was bad. So, that's okay. But yeah, this has been a really cool conversation. Thank you for taking the time, Maddie. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I feel like you're like a great resource for Uruguay because you have so much experience there. I mean, 6 years is a really long time, and so I feel like we probably only kind of touched the surface on a bunch of things that we could have talked about. So maybe in the future, we can do another one of these or something like that. But before we wrap up this one, tell people how they can like find your content online.
Well, at the moment, interesting question. I've changed my socials a lot, but currently it's Maddie in Montevideo. So on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. My YouTube is just getting off its feet again. It, had an unfortunate incident a couple months ago where the whole account got deleted and I had to start fresh. But yeah, I post all on several platforms. I have multiple places, but the Maddie in Montevideo is where I post all about foreign life, being here in Uruguay, trying to help other people who come here to have maybe a smoother transition than what I had just by putting information out there in English. Because I feel like there's very limited info about Uruguay in general. And if you don't understand a good amount of Spanish before arriving, then it's like, you're probably not going to have any idea what to expect. So that was the goal of starting my social media. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Sweet. And I'll, of course, I'll put links in the description, so people can check it out that way. Thanks again. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you later.